The judge's clerk wouldn't look at me, and that's how I knew before anyone said a word. Not the courtroom itself, with its bad fluorescent lighting and the radiator clanking somewhere behind the bench like it had its own opinion about the proceedings. Not the smell of the place, which was somehow both stale and too clean, like industrial lemon poured over an old building that had seen 40 years of people's worst days. What I keep coming back to is the clerk, a woman maybe 60. Reading glasses pushed up into gray curls, who glanced at me once when I walked in and then very deliberately did not look at me again. People who work in family court learn to do that. They've already read the file. They already know which version of the story is about to fall apart, and they don't want their face to give it away early. I was sitting at the respondent's table in the Ontario Superior Court on Queen Street, wearing a charcoal blazer. My lawyer had specifically vetoed 2 other options for not navy, it reads defensive, not black, it reads cold. Charcoal, she'd said, like she was choosing paint for a kitchen. My name is Claire Donovan. I was 36 years old, sitting with my hands flat on the table because if I let them curl into fists, they would shake. And across the aisle, at the applicant's table, sat my husband of 9 years, wearing the navy suit I'd bought him for his sister's wedding, looking like a man who had rehearsed his own outrage in a mirror that morning. His name was Patrick Greaves. And by the time we were both sitting in that courtroom in late November, with the kind of gray Toronto sky pressing against the windows that makes 4 o'clock feel like midnight, I had stopped being able to remember exactly when he became a stranger wearing my husband's face. His lawyer rose first, a tall man named Gordon Pratt with a laser pointer's kind of voice, precise, a little too pleased with himself, the way some men get when they think they already know how the afternoon is going to end. "Your Honor," he said, "the applicant intends to introduce evidence today regarding the respondent's conduct during the marriage, specifically evidence of an extramarital relationship." I felt the floor of my stomach drop straight through the building's foundation and into the subway tunnel I knew ran somewhere underneath us. I want to tell you how I ended up in that room, because nothing about it started in that room. It started years earlier, the way most disasters do, quietly, in a life that from the outside looked like it was working perfectly fine. I met Patrick at a fundraising gala for a children's literacy charity in Yorkville when I was 26. He worked in commercial insurance, underwriting, wore a tie that actually matched his pocket square, and laughed at something I said within the first 90 seconds of meeting me, which felt, at 26, like the most important quality a person could have. We were married 14 months later at a small ceremony outside Niagara on the lake, because my mother insisted that getting married anywhere near a vineyard automatically made it elegant, and honestly, she wasn't wrong. We bought a semi-detached house in Leslieville in 2016, the kind with the narrow staircase that everyone in that neighborhood complains about and nobody actually wants to give up, because the original tin ceiling in the living room was the whole reason we'd fallen for the place. The mortgage was $2,890 a month, which felt suffocating the year we signed and almost reasonable 5 years later, once my business had grown into something real. We had a rescue beagle named Otis, who ate an entire wheel of brie off the counter once and never showed a single moment of remorse. We had a porch that needed repainting every single spring that Patrick promised to handle and never once did. We had, on the surface, the comfortable architecture of a life assembled correctly. I'd started a boutique event production company, Birchcraft Events, 6 years before all of this, with $11,000 of savings and a borrowed laptop, working out of our kitchen because the second bedroom hadn't been renovated yet. By the time Patrick filed for divorce, Birchcraft was bringing in just over $410,000 a year. mostly producing corporate launches and weddings for clients who found me through word of mouth in a city where word of mouth is the only currency that actually means anything. I had 3 full-time staff, a studio space in Liberty Village, and a client roster that included 2 financial firms and 1 fairly well-known Canadian fashion label I still couldn't quite believe had picked me. Patrick made a respectable living, somewhere around $88,000 a year, steady, never spectacular, the kind of number that's genuinely fine on its own and somehow stops feeling fine the moment it's standing next to a bigger one at the same dinner table. I never thought the income gap mattered. I was wrong about that, though I didn't know it yet. We didn't fight loudly. That's always the first thing people ask when they hear the broad shape of this story. Were there warning signs? Were there arguments? And the honest answer is that our marriage wasn't loud enough to have proper fights in. It was more like a house where someone keeps turning the thermostat down half a degree at a time. So slowly, you never once feel the actual moment of getting cold. You just notice, one ordinary Tuesday, that you've started keeping your coat on indoors. The person at the center of this whole story is a man named Theo Bellamy. Theo was 41, sharp, in that understated way some people are, a freelance brand consultant I'd brought on 18 months before any of this began. He came recommended by a client I trusted completely, with a portfolio that made me genuinely a little envious, and a day rate of $575 I didn't even try to negotiate down, because one look at his prior work told me he was worth it. We worked together across 2 major rebrands over the better part of a year, dozens of meetings, most of them in my studio's small glass-walled conference room, a few of them at a coffee shop on Queen West when the studio's HVAC system decided to die in the middle of August. We texted about deck revisions and deadline shifts and whether a particular shade of forest green was reading too corporate. We were colleagues. That is the complete truth of what Theo Bellamy was to me, beginning to end. Patrick had decided something else entirely, and Patrick, as I would come to learn in pieces over the following months, had spent the better part of half a year quietly constructing a different version of that truth. The first time something felt off, I let it go in about 30 seconds, which is the kind of thing you replay at 2 a.m. years later, wanting to grab your own shoulders and shake some sense into yourself. It was a Wednesday in late September. I'd gotten home from the studio close to 8, after back-to-back client calls since 7 that morning, walked in through the side door, dropped my bag on the kitchen island, and found Patrick standing at the counter with his phone face down beside the cutting board and an expression on his face that looked rehearsed, like he'd been standing there for a while deciding what his features should be doing before I walked through the door. "Hey," I said. "Rough one. Is there any of that chicken left?" "Fridge," he said. I found the chicken. I put it on a plate. When I turned back around, he was still standing there, still wearing that arranged look. "You okay?" I asked. "Fine," he said. "You sure? You've got your thinking hard face on." "I'm fine, Claire." He picked his phone back up and walked into the den. I ate standing at the counter. I told myself he was stressed about a renewal at work. I told myself we should plan something for the weekend, a hike up in the Bruce Peninsula maybe, something to reconnect. I thought about the floral order I still needed to confirm for Saturday's wedding. I did not think, my husband is studying me like a problem to be solved. I did not think, he has already started building a case. I did not understand that the look on his face wasn't stress at all, but something far colder, the particular stillness of someone who has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. 3 weeks after that, I came home to find Otis shut outside in the backyard at 9:30 at night in a near-freezing October wind, something Patrick knew I would never allow. When I brought the dog in, shivering, and asked what had happened, Patrick said he'd lost track of time. I stood in the kitchen with Otis's leash still in my hand, looking at my husband's face, and something shifted low in my chest, not quite alarm. More like the first faint hum of a tuning fork struck somewhere down the hall. I should have paid attention to that hum. I didn't. It was a month before the court date that I learned exactly how far Patrick had gone. My lawyer, a calm, exacting woman named Priya Sandhu, called me on a Thursday afternoon, and the tone in her voice when I picked up, flat, deliberate, the careful cadence of someone reciting something they'd rehearsed, told me it was bad before she said a single substantive word. "Claire," she said, "I need you to come in tomorrow morning." Gordon Pratt filed a supplementary disclosure this afternoon. I'm looking at it right now. What's in it? A pause. Photographs, time-stamped ones, a private investigator's report. Another pause, longer, and a witness. I sat down on the floor of my studio. I don't know why the floor, my chair, was right there, but I sat down with my back against the desk and the phone pressed against my ear and asked, "A witness to what?" Exactly. To you and Theo Bellamy entering and exiting the Thompson Hotel on the evening of April the 11th. My mind went completely blank for a second, then it caught up all at once. "We had a client dinner," I said. "The client was staying there. We used the hotel's business center to finalize the pitch deck because my laptop battery died and I'd left my charger at the studio. We were inside for under an hour. I have the Uber receipts. Both of ours. Do you have anything documenting the client meeting itself?" Emails, a calendar invite, the deck file with the edit timestamp from the hotel's Wi-Fi network. I was already on my feet, already moving toward my laptop. "Priya, I have everything." "Good," she said. "Bring all of it tomorrow." I spent that whole night assembling 7 months of documentation, invoices, calendar entries, Uber receipts, meeting notes, client emails that referenced Theo by name in a purely professional context. I ended up with 51 separate pieces of paper showing that every interaction Theo Bellamy and I had ever had was scheduled, client-related, and frankly, boring. I tabbed them, indexed them, slid them into a binder. I didn't sleep. I drank an entire pot of coffee and watched the sky over King Street shift, from black to the flat gray that passes for dawn in Toronto in late October, and I thought, let him try. That was the thing Patrick had badly miscalculated. He'd spent 6 months constructing a story. I had spent 11 years building a business, and running a business teaches you exactly one lesson above all the others. Documentation is everything. You document your contracts because clients forget what they agreed to. You document your hours because partners forget what they promised. You do it because the world is full of people who remember things differently than they actually happened, and the only thing that ever cuts cleanly through two competing versions of reality is a paper trail. I had the paper trail. Patrick didn't know it yet. The morning of the hearing, Priya met me outside the courthouse at 8:45, carrying a slim leather folio and wearing what I'd started privately calling her courtroom face, stiller and more exact than her ordinary one. Like someone had turned a dial. "He's going to try to make this ugly before it gets better," she said. "Let him. Don't react. Don't look at Patrick. Don't look at the witness. Look at me. Or look at the judge. When it's our turn, we walk the bench through everything, piece by piece." "Okay," I said. She put a hand briefly on my arm. "I've read all of it, Claire. You're going to be fine." I nodded. I didn't entirely believe her. I walked in anyway. The first half hour was procedural, motions and scheduling and exhibit numbers, while my body sat very still inside that charcoal blazer. Then Gordon Pratt stood, laid out the asset division argument with the smooth, over-rehearsed confidence of a man who'd already decided how the afternoon would end, and pivoted to the infidelity claim. "Your Honor," he said, The applicant alleges the respondent engaged in an extramarital relationship with Mr. Theo Bellamy, a contractor retained by her company, over a period of approximately 14 months. We have photographic evidence, a private investigator's report, and a witness prepared to speak to the nature of that relationship. He called Theo to the stand. Theo walked in through the side entrance, and I watched him cross the room. He looked entirely calm, not nervous, not guilty, not the way a person looks when they're about to participate in a lie. He sat down, folded his hands, and when the registrar asked him to state his name for the record, his voice didn't shake at all. Gordon began with the photographs, handing copies up to the judge while he narrated them aloud. Mr. Bellamy and the respondent entering the Thompson Hotel. Mr. Bellamy and the respondent at a cafe on Queen West. Mr. Bellamy and the respondent in the parking lot outside her studio, standing close together, apparently mid-conversation. Mr. Bellamy, Gordon said, how would you describe your relationship with Claire Donovan? Theo looked at him, then he looked at me. Then he reached into his jacket and took out his phone. Your Honor, he said. Before I answer that, I'd like permission to play a recording. The whole room went still. Gordon's head snapped toward him with the particular sharpness of a man hearing something that wasn't in his script. The judge, a woman named Justice Eleanor Kwan, leaned forward slightly. What kind of recording? A phone call, Your Honor, between myself and Patrick Greaves. Ontario is a one-party consent province for recorded calls. I'm one of the two parties. It was recorded on August the 19th of this year, roughly 2 months before these proceedings started. Priya was on her feet before Gordon could speak. Your Honor, the respondent would ask the court to hear this recording and move to enter it into evidence. Gordon stood too. Objection. This is entirely irregular. The witness cannot simply. It's a statement made by the applicant himself, Priya said, her voice perfectly even. It bears directly on the credibility of the evidence currently before the court. Justice Kwan looked at Gordon. She looked at Priya. She looked at Theo. I'll hear it, she said. Go ahead. Theo pressed play. The audio was clear enough that Patrick's voice filled the courtroom without a flicker of doubt about whose it was. Theo, listen. I know you and Claire have a professional thing. I get that. But I need you to understand what's on the line for me financially here. She built that company during our marriage, which means under Ontario law, I'm entitled to an equalization payment based on its value. But my lawyer says if I can show infidelity, even just establish reasonable suspicion, it changes the leverage on the whole settlement. I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to be vague. Don't deny it if you get called. Let people draw their own conclusions. I'll make it worth your while. I'm talking $15,000. The silence that followed had actual weight to it. I felt it pressing down across the whole room. Then Patrick's voice again, from the recording. You've been alone with her in hotel rooms, at coffee shops, late nights at her studio. Nobody needs to know what did or didn't happen. They just need to wonder. Theo stopped the playback. I looked at Justice Kwan. The contempt that had been sitting on her face when I'd first walked in that morning was still there. But it had swung in a different direction now. Gordon Pratt had gone completely still at the applicant's table. Patrick, beside him, had turned the particular gray-white of a man who has just watched the floor open underneath him. Priya was already moving. She submitted Theo's written statement, the recording's metadata confirming date and time, and a text message Patrick had sent Theo 4 days earlier reading, "Think about it. It's a good number for you." Then she submitted my binder, all 51 tabbed exhibits, including the hotel's business center login records, showing 38 minutes between entry and exit on April 11th, alongside a client email thread that began at 9:04 that same evening, referencing the finalized deck. She stood at the podium and said, in that level, exact voice of hers, Your Honor, the applicant did not discover an affair. He manufactured the appearance of one and attempted to pay a witness to support a false narrative. Every exhibit submitted by the applicant has a documented, professional explanation, and the applicant has, in his own recorded words, admitted he knew there was nothing there to find. She paused. We'd asked the court to address sanctions. What followed over the next several weeks wasn't fast, and it wasn't clean. Anyone who tells you justice feels satisfying has never actually had to sit through the paperwork of it. There were further appearances. There was a referral to the Crown regarding the attempted inducement of a witness, which in Ontario is its own matter entirely, separate from the divorce, regardless of whether the money ever actually changed hands. Gordon Pratt withdrew from representing Patrick within 2 weeks. Patrick hired someone quieter, and that lawyer's entire posture in the hearings that followed was the posture of a man trying to limit the damage rather than win anything. The equalization payment was ultimately calculated almost entirely in my favor on the basis that Birchcraft had been built overwhelmingly through my own individual labor and client relationships, with no demonstrable contribution from Patrick. I kept the company, I kept the staff, I kept the studio lease. The house in Leslieville, tin ceiling and all, was ordered sold, the proceeds split, which worked out to just under $71,000 each after the mortgage was cleared. It wasn't what either of us had wanted going in, probably, but it was fair, which is a different and frankly rarer thing. Patrick was separately charged in connection with the witness tampering attempt. He pled it down to a lesser offense and received a conditional discharge, a fine, and a period of probation. I found out through a 2-line email from Priya. I didn't feel triumphant reading it. I felt tired in a way that sat in my bones. Theo texted me the day after the recording was played. He came to me about 2 months ago. I said no on the spot. Then I started recording everything, just in case. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. I wrote back, you showed up exactly when it mattered. Thank you. We haven't talked much since. He's working with other clients now, building other people's brands. I think about him sometimes, about the specific kind of steadiness it takes to record a bribe attempt and then walk into a courtroom and play it out loud, knowing it's going to detonate a situation that had nothing to do with him in the first place. That's not a small thing. I'm not sure there's a word big enough for it. Otis came with me, which was never up for discussion, and Patrick, to his credit, didn't fight me on it. The one thing in this whole process he got entirely right. I live in a 1-bedroom in Roncesvalles now, 2nd floor, good light in the afternoons, no homeowners association emails about my front window decorations because there's no front window to decorate. Birchcraft had its best quarter ever in the 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I've come to think there's something about surviving a thing that's actively trying to take you apart in public that clarifies your priorities in a way almost nothing else can. My mother called the week the final ruling came down. I never trusted him, she said. Mom, you gave a toast at our wedding. I kept it vague on purpose. I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. It wasn't a big laugh, but it was real, and it was mine. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. A marriage can come apart from silence just as thoroughly as it can come apart from shouting. I spent years in a house where someone kept turning the temperature down, and I kept telling myself I'd deal with it later. By the time I understood what was actually happening, Patrick had already decided I was a problem to be managed rather than a person he'd promised to stand beside. I don't know exactly when he made that decision. I'm not sure it matters anymore. What matters is this. I kept records of everything, not because I suspected anything, just because that's how I run my life. And when someone tried to weaponize the truth by surrounding it with lies, the paperwork cut straight through it. Keep your receipts. In business, in marriage, in everything. Not out of paranoia. Out of respect for your own version of events. Because one day, someone may try to tell you your life didn't happen the way it happened. And the only thing standing between you and that other version will be the proof you thought to save before you ever knew you'd need it. The house on that narrow Leslieville street sold to a young couple who told the agent on their very first walkthrough that the first thing they were going to do was repaint the porch. I hope they actually do it.